Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this world of ours. I truly hope you're safe and sound. I'm Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and welcome to Carnegie Connects, a series of conversations on issues of critical importance to America and to the world. Today, I'm truly honored and pleased to welcome back to the show Deputy Secretary Kurt Campbell. Kurt needs no introduction, and looking at his resume, though, it's remarkable the degree to which his career has spanned government, Department of State, NSC, and Defense, private sector, think tanks, and the academy. And I'm just realizing, although I knew this, Kurt, that you're the author or editor of at least 10 books, which is no small mean accomplishment, given how much time you probably don't have. You were sworn in this February as the 22nd Deputy Secretary of State. So, Kurt Campbell, let me welcome you to Carnegie Connects. You've been a mentor and friend of mine for quite some time. And thanks for your time.
First of all, let me just say it's my pleasure. And I think we both know that the direction of the mentorship goes the other way. And I want your listeners to know there's probably no one who's helped us think through or just struggle with the enormous challenges of the Middle East more directly. We share a place that we go to occasionally for a cup of coffee on the weekends, and almost invariably, whoever I'm with will stop by Aaron's table to hear his wisdom or his reflections, or frankly, more recently, some of his concerns about what's playing out in the Middle East. And so, frankly, it's the reverse. Very grateful for the chance to be on the program. Frankly, I think I could learn from you more today than the reverse, but I'm at least grateful for this opportunity.
Too kind, Kurt. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. I said in the invitation, I paraphrased George Will's comment that when it comes to foreign policy, the American public seems to want as little of it as possible. But despite that, I think looking at almost 4 years of the Biden administration, you'd have to admit that the administration's been confronted by a whirlwind of foreign policy challenges. From Afghanistan to Ukraine to China to the escalating situation in the Middle East. I want to start with two big picture questions. The first, it just seems to me, looking out over our world, that from a national security foreign policy point of view, the world seems to be a place that's more likely to be managed, hopefully smartly, rather than actually transformed. I look out at the challenges that the Biden administration faces, and its predecessors and its successors will. I see problems that don't have solutions or determinative or comprehensive outcomes, from China to Iran to North Korea, to what to do about nuclear proliferation. So I just wanted to ask you, first big picture question: How does the U.S. lead in a world that will be, let's put it this way, will be very hard to transform? The Constitution talks about affecting a perfect union. It doesn't say much about affecting a perfect world, although that you and I know, Kurt, that U.S. leadership is elemental and foundational to trying. So I just wonder, how do we lead in this troubled, complicated world?
Yeah. First of all, it's probably, Aaron, the most important question that frankly sits before Americans right now as we face a hugely consequential election in November. If I can say my own experience, the thing that I've been most struck by, both in this job and the job that I came from at the White House, is the desire of partners and allies to actually work constructively with the United States. And in truth, that sounds somewhat simple, the idea of working in collaboration with your most trusted partners. But what they are actually looking for is a form of truly deep and frankly sincere partnership, not a situation where the United States comes in at the last, dictates terms, and then we launch from there. They're frankly looking for complex discussions, negotiations on issues of mutual import. And so when you go back and look at this administration, first of all, I would agree with you that the challenges are unprecedented, and each of them does not stay in its nice little silo. They have a tendency to impact the others. And you didn't mention other issues that we're dealing with, the residual issues associated with COVID and worries about new epidemics, the challenges of climate change, which frankly are coming at us much more furiously and intensively than even scientists thought a few years ago. These tend to combine in ways that are unpredictable and dangerous. What I have found is, again, the desire in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe in particular, the desire of countries to work more closely with the United States. I think you saw that on full display during the NATO meetings in Washington, the 75th anniversary. Hard not to feel some degree of pride and accomplishment given the challenges that we faced historically, the ability of the organization to adapt to new members, to new challenges, but also these new partnerships in the Indo-Pacific and how they link back to Europe and in ways that no one would have anticipated. What I would say again, if you ask me what truly was the Biden doctrine, and if presidential doctrines, Aaron, are meant to be almost involuntary, like not even aware that you're doing something, that are intrinsic to how you see the world, not planned or proselytized about, but just incumbent to how a leader and administration has worked. I would say that President Biden's proudest accomplishment has been his ability to work with allies and partners, not just regionally and across regionally, but on new issues that previously had either defied partnership or did not rise to the occasion. So what we've been able to do on technology, on sort of shared threat perceptions, issues on disinformation, those are powerful combinations that we seek to advance going forward. And I agree that many in the United States have trepidations about global politics or worries about getting encumbered in difficult situations, diverting resources away from critical national priorities. But one thing that a series of polls have told us, and there was a wonderful set of polling done through Carnegie Aegis a few years ago, suggests that Americans, despite the challenges, prefer to work in concert and partnership with other like-minded states, not to go it alone, not to be isolationist, but really to work in conjunction with the people that see the world like we do.
Yeah, it might have been easier during the Cold War, Kurt, when there was a clear organizing principle that seemed to force countries to choose. It's not so easy now when those organizing principles will no longer constitute a coherent or cohesive whole. I wanted to ask you about the question of addition and subtraction. There's a wonderful line from Shakespeare's Henry IV in which one character says to the other, "I can summon the spirits from the vasty deep," and the other replies, "But so can any man." The question is, do they come when you call? Jack Kennedy loved that line. And it really does embody the whole notion of how you deepening relationships with your friends is hard, but it's an easier lift than trying to figure out what to do about those countries that have doubts about American leadership, maybe sitting on the fence. So I'm not even talking about the frenemies. How do we add rather than subtract, particularly in the global South?
Look, it's a great question. It's something that frankly propels us and causes us to think about our tools and our approach. First of all, I think we have to acknowledge, Aaron, that we are facing enormous challenges in the global South. And the first thing, and addressing a policy challenge is just recognizing that it exists.
Mhm.
The truth is the global south is not one place. There are a number of regional dimensions, different features globally. I've worked mostly on Africa and the South Pacific, both of whom feel that they are members of the global south, have some concerns about either global conflict or climate change or issues associated with inflation, cost of foodstuffs, all of those issues. I think it would be fair to say that we need to find, as you suggest, new tools of engagement to articulate our value proposition. In Africa, what I have found is a deep desire for continuing American engagement. And that means finding new tools to underscore our commitment to investment. I'll say something, Aaron, that will come as a surprise to many folks. There's often the belief that we do not have the tools to compete on infrastructure investment, for instance, with a country like China. If you look at last year, China's Belt and Road in Africa invested, something under $10 billion. Hard to do true arithmetic here because they don't really publish as much, and it's not clear what the actual value of engagements are. But our DFC, Development Finance Corporation, in the last calendar year invested $12 billion in the global south, much of that in Africa. Now, we've done a terrible job at explaining that and underscoring our commitments to critical minerals, to supply chains, and the like. But the truth is, we are seeking to find new tools to engage in places. So I will say in Africa, for me, it probably begins with technology dialogues. This is a massive continent. In the next couple of years, will probably approach 40% of the global population. Tremendous interest in technology, the additive qualities, the potential to leapfrog in terms of certain capacities. So we've tried to articulate engagements with key countries around technology. We are working to try to develop partnerships along development corridors. When the president visits Southern Africa in a couple of weeks, he will underscore that approach in Angola, in particular, the so-called Lobito corridor. We're also seeking to continue certain programs which, frankly, Aaron, are remarkable, but we have not, I think, fully articulated their importance. President Bush's commitment to PEPFAR and dealing with infectious diseases across the global south has been just a robust success, and we seek to continue that as we go forward. In truth, some of the things that these countries are looking for, big stadiums for sports, leadership houses, and things like that, that China provides, that's not what we're in the business of providing. We're much more about wherewithal for the people. If you look at our projects, they involve a huge amount of local training, what we call skilling, to bring people more into the work stream of the host country. Many of the projects that China, other countries engage in, have a host of foreign workers coming in and then leaving with very little value added more directly. But all that being said, David, Aaron, we are focusing enormously on some of the disinformation and narrative challenges, which are tough in the global south. Questions about American, standing, what we believe in, and that's obviously influenced by the Middle East and other challenges that we've faced. I would just underscore that the next administration, this is got to be front and center, is thinking constructively, again, with allies and partners, about how to step up our game in the global south.
a lot of that has to do, I suspect, with the value proposition and the seeming contradictions and anomalies and even hypocrisies that many countries see in U.S. foreign
Yeah.
policy, whether it's trying to draw parallels between Ukraine and Russia's invasion in Gaza. Um, let's do a little tour around the world, and I'm going to start with the easiest issue of all, Kurt, which is the Middle East. Now, I'm starting with a sort of a bias in the sense I spent 27 years inside working on this problem. I know how hard it is. I'm extremely judicious and careful in my critique of administration officials because I don't think people really fully appreciate the constraints under which Republican and Democratic administrations have worked on this issue. But I do want to, because it is the headline and it's likely to be, sadly, a trend line as well. Just wanted to get your sense of how you look at the last year. It seems to me, despite tireless efforts of people who you and I both know and respect, it really has been a reflection more than anything else of the limitations and the constraints under which American power and leverage has worked. But I just wonder what's your sense, if you can give, of the last year, particularly in Gaza, and then we can have a brief discussion on how the administration sees the current Israeli policy in Lebanon and yesterday's strikes by Iran against Israel.
Well, look, Aaron, I don't think I need to tell you that this is a moment of real peril, but also some possibility. I think we have to be careful about predicting what's going to come next. I would say that what I've seen over the course of the last year is an incredibly determined, capable group of people in the United States that are seeking outcomes in the Middle East that would preserve a secure and stable Israel, a just two-state solution. I think more integration between Israel and other countries, pulling Saudi Arabia in. I think there's been a lot of discussion about a different kind of government in Lebanon. I see lots of important work that is being done on Aaron, what we might call the day after, which is the hope of all who have worked on these issues. We've brought new countries who are deeply focused on, for instance, Gaza, who would like to make their contributions known. We've always worked with the Middle Eastern states and the Gulf states. We've had deep conversations with countries in Southeast Asia who have very large, frankly, the largest Islamic populations in the world, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and others, who want to lend a hand to an effort to rebuild and to support in Gaza and in the West Bank. So there's lots of work that has been done on that effort, but I must say that on a day-to-day basis, the issues of conflict, the matters associated with the immediate delivery of humanitarian assistance, the engagement with global partners in international institutions, much of that work has been consuming and vexing and deeply challenging. I will say, Aaron, and this is not an exaggeration. Frankly, I learn more and get better perspective from those morning stops by your table on Saturday. I'm not going to reveal where we meet because I don't want other people to go there. Frankly, than a lot of discussions that I've had. I will just say that many of the colleagues that I've worked with at the State Department are some of the most professional and devoted and determined public servants. I think what I've seen among them is an enormous sense of concern, just sadness, tremendous. They worked basically around the clock for a year now, and it would be hard at this moment to say that the immediate future is as optimistic as any of us would want to see.
Yeah, I mean, one of the central relationships is the U.S.-Israeli relationship, and I mean, we could talk for the rest of the session on the ups and downs over the course of the past year. But I want to ask you a question geared to Iran. The president is going to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu today. Apparently, it's being reported before the beginning of the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah. And clearly, the issue of an Israeli response to 180 plus ballistic missiles launched at Israel yesterday. 2 Israelis lightly wounded. Ironically, a Palestinian from Gaza, a man was killed in Jericho. I just wonder, the Israelis have not yet responded. How much consultation and coordination is going on in this critically 24 to 48 hour period, maybe longer, in which the Israelis evaluate precisely how they are going to respond? I think a response is inevitable. But I just wonder, in view of the call and other reports of the importance of coordination, how do you read all that, Kurt?
Look, Aaron, some of this is ongoing, so again, I want to be careful about it. I would say the consultations and coordination with Israel, certainly major efforts on both sides to keep lines of communication open and to make sure that perspectives are understood. There have been moments of surprise. I don't think that's a secret over the course of the last couple of months. I think, in truth, what you're talking about with respect to the Iranian attack on Israel, it is not just Israel that is thinking about its response options. It is also the United States.
Yeah.
So you've heard very clearly what the president has stated, that this is, or from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan reporting this, what we view what Iran has undertaken is deeply irresponsible, escalatory, and dangerous, and that there must be a return message. And so I think there are some deliberations that are ongoing. At the same time, I think we recognize, as important as a response of some kind should be, there is a recognition that the region is really balancing on a knife's edge, and real concerns about a even broader escalation, or a continuing one, not just simply an exchange of sort of isolated salvos, but of more sustained hostility, which could imperil not just Israel, but our strategic interests as well. So I think what the administration has sought, and what the president will seek to do with Israel, is to compare notes, to recognize that much of what Israel is doing is legitimate. The attacks from Lebanon into Israel have been destabilizing, and they have complicated the already dangerous situation that we're facing with Hamas. So I think we tried to underscore our support for some of the actions that Israel has taken. I think we have real wariness about a extended or substantial ground set of operations in Lebanon. I think the truth is, when we compare notes on that, it is also the Israelis, Aaron, who have anxieties from previous experiences. So those discussions are ongoing. I will say our consistent view is to try to move, if it ever possible, to a situation in which there is a pause or a period of restraint by all actors to begin a process of more constructive way and path forward. Given all that's happened, it's hard to be optimistic about what's negotiations that are still ongoing on the hostages. It's difficult to imagine a situation that Hezbollah, Iran, and Israel all believe that for the time being, it's best to holster the weapon. But that, I think, will be the consistent role of American diplomacy, and what the President, Secretary Blinken, National Security Advisor Sullivan, a huge amount of our time is mustering surrounding voices in the region, other players in Europe, to weigh in about the larger interests that are in play here, not only global shipping through the Red Sea, but also substantial movements of people that are destabilizing, humanitarian challenges that are presenting us urgent options. So I think the likely engagements over the next few days are to try to align as much as we can perspectives between Israel and the United States. We've stated all along our determination to support Israel. Its security challenges are real. Their responses are legitimate. But at the same time, I think we also recognize that the longer that these conflicts go on, the challenges and the uncertainties associated with unpredictable issues associated with escalation, they're just very real, Aaron. So I think what I can tell you is the amount of time and focus that this is taking from our senior leadership cannot be underestimated.
Yeah. I mean, what you seem to be saying, Kurt, is that April 13, 14, the president encouraged the Israelis when the Iranians launched 300 high trajectory weapons, most of which didn't even enter Israeli airspace, but he encouraged them to take the win. And they responded with a standoff strike against a S-300 radar facility in Isfahan. This time around, it seems, administration is trying to find a balance. Jake Sullivan talked about severe consequences. The president used the word fully 3 times when he was asked the other day whether the U.S. supports Israel. The administration is looking for a response that sends that message, satisfies Israeli needs, but without tripping the region into an inexorable escalation that could, frankly, lead to something the Middle East has never experienced before, ever, which is a multi-front war involving AI, cyber, drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. That seems to be, and it's I think good that there's this space between the Iranian strike and this process of consultation between the Israelis and the administration.
Could I just make one point on that, Aaron?
Sure.
I agree with that. I will say one of the things that's interesting, we maintain communications, active communications with everyone in the region, more so with some actors that I just were not aware of in previous capacities. I would say at a general proposition that most of the major actors do not seek or desire, it certainly in the current context, a wider escalating conflict in the Middle East. In fact, what drives many of the actors is an effort to either reinforce deterrence or a sense of purpose, or demonstrate that we still have agency, and those actions then can create responses and the like. And so I think what's interesting here, Aaron, is I don't see the some of the indicators of a desire for a broadly escalatory set of engagements. I think there's a recognition that is dangerous. Second, I will also say, for all the questions about the effectiveness of American diplomacy and the challenges, it is clear that we play the essential role keeping all these various doors of communication and subtle signaling open, and without us, that would not be happening.
Yeah.
And so, I am confident that right now that our dominant message is let's take great care in whatever we do with respect to Iran. I will say those actions, what Iran has done with Hezbollah, not that it needed any clarifying, but has certainly reinforced, for instance, with European friends and partners, the concerns of what Iran has been doing. And I think there had been the view a new government in Iran could be, worked with in a different way. I think this has been helpful and clarifying in that context going forward. I do also believe that that despite the fact that Israeli military and other leaders are, at least to date, moderately satisfied with the outcome of what they've undertaken against Hezbollah, there is also a worry about taking that too far and becoming overextended.
Yeah.
And so I will tell you some of those conversations are somewhat reassuring.
Yeah, I mean, I'd only add that before we got on, there was a CNN report that 8 Israeli soldiers were killed in intense fighting in southern Lebanon with Hezbollah. I think the Israeli experience in Lebanon, 82 to 2000, was a very unhappy one,
Yes.
to say the least. And I think they are aware of that. I want to turn now to an area that you've covered, spent a lot of time on, that's China. And I just want to make an observation to have you respond. It just seems over the decades, our policy toward China has toggled back and forth between, on one hand, looking at Beijing as sort of Satan's finger on earth on one hand, and then on the other, looking at China as a sort of responsible stakeholder that is willing to play by the rules, international rules, which we have largely fashioned. So I wonder, just question analytically, Kurt, are we getting China? Do you think we're getting China right?
Yeah. So look, Aaron, I don't see the same toggling back and forth. I see more a process that has evolved over time, and I'll just say a couple things about that. I think no country had and has been more engaged in the project of pulling China first into the 20th century and all the possibilities of global supply chains, development, manufacturing. We were the key country that helped China along that path, beginning with the opening. And what China's accomplished is due to the hard work of the Chinese people, but it is undeniable that we've provided some of the larger context. Peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific, huge amounts of investment into China, and also an open market to absorb many of the goods that China produced, and also a deep respect and engagement on building a relationship with China that would be lasting going forward. I think for a variety of reasons, over the course of the last decade and a half, it is not just Xi Jinping, but it is a China that believes, first, that the United States is in decline. They've always had some anxieties about American leadership, whether those involve a view that the United States sees, the possibility of regime change in Beijing. That's always been an animating concern. But for a variety of reasons, a sense that it's China's time to assert itself and to help move the United States off the global stage. Now, much of that is not explicit, although some of it is under Xi. President Xi is much more outspoken in his written and public language about Chinese aspirations than any previous Chinese leader. And at the same time, a sense that the United States doesn't have the wherewithal to maintain its leadership position. The one thing I would just simply comment to you about is I do believe the United States, with other countries, have been involved, Aaron, in a project to build what you might describe as an operating system in the Indo-Pacific and globally that has led to this remarkable set of achievements, of which, frankly, I would argue that China is the largest beneficiary of. I think some of the changes that President Xi in China wants to make now would go at the very heart of that operating system in ways that are antithetical to our interests and the interests of our allies and partners. And so I think what the United States has sought to do is not to contain or constrain China. In many respects, we are responding to a China that is more assertive, more aggressive, and that are challenging elements of this operating system: peaceful resolution of disputes, navigational confidence, law of the sea, rule of law, contracts. You can go through all that sort of complex fabric that make up this operating system, Aaron. And so I think we're in a period of contesting that now. And I would tell you, I think one of the reasons why we've had such success, particularly in the Indo-Pacific and parts of Europe, in bringing partners along, is that many of these countries share concerns about the recent directions of Chinese foreign policy and the like. And so I think this trajectory that you described is more a result and a response to what is taking place in China. I don't see us like skipping around. I think that process is measurable and will likely continue. There are going to be those who say, let's go back to the 90s, let's go back to engagement. I think in many respects, we've transcended that into a new period in which the dominant paradigm is competition.
Right.
We need to recognize that. We want that competition to be stable and not trend to conflict. And that's why we try to build mechanisms of dialogue and consultation and work with allies and partners. But I think that's the directional indicators ahead. I will also say that China plays a huge role, an increasing role in the Middle East. We've talked, you and I, Aaron, about the diplomacy efforts on the part of China in the Gulf with Gulf partners working on technology. But I'll also give you a sense that we are always seeking opportunities where possible, whether it's on fentanyl or technology, to find some common ground with China. And I'll give you an example. We immediately after the Houthis started attacking shipping through the Red Sea, we approached Chinese interlocutors to work with us or some element of the international community on trying to protect this shipping that has a huge amount to do with Chinese, wherewithal, by using their squadron in Djibouti in ways that they did in the 1990s together with us to deal with piracy. And we thought that there was a real chance that China would say yes, because the shipping that was affected had so much to do with China's lifeblood. After sort of studying it for a while, we realized that what the Chinese had tried to do, rather than joining with any kind of international naval consortium, would be to instead take actions to communicate directly with the Houthis about, look, these are our ships, these aren't our ships, target different ships. Now that's just profoundly unhelpful and suggests an approach to the global commons that we have real concerns over.
Yeah. I wish we had more time. I have many more questions on China, but we're actually running out of time. I didn't want to spend as much time on the Middle East as we did, but we ended up, which I think was worthwhile.
Aaron, the truth is these dialogues in some respects mimic the activities of government. We'd love to have, time to spend on all the things that are urgent, but sometimes we are drawn to the immediate.
Yeah. It's the one defining difference between the academy and government, the absence of time and space in government. So I have two questions for you. Number one, Ukraine. The logic of our support for Ukraine, I assume, is based on the notion that if we can alter Vladimir Putin's calculations on the battlefield, then maybe you could create a situation where Putin would be forced, either as a consequence of a real hurting stalemate, probably unlikely, to come to the negotiating table. So, in that issue, have we been too risk averse? I realize the dangers of escalation, greatly realize them. Have we been too risk averse in what we're prepared to provide to the Ukrainian military, specifically on the issue of ATACMS? Has any decision been made yet to provide longer range attacks? I think Kyiv and Moscow are 500 miles apart, something like that. Any decisions yet on the ATACMS?
Yeah, Aaron, I don't have anything for you on that now. I know you recognize that this is a subject of active discussion.
Right.
I will underscore just directly that we are, by far and away the largest provider of assistance to Ukraine. Much of that has been delivered on a timely basis, and we've helped with training and the like. Ultimately, I think there is a recognition that some of this is going to have to be dealt with at the negotiating table. And the hope will be that at some point in the not too distant future, we will find ourselves in a way that some kind of diplomatic engagement.
Yeah.
I will say that the concerns that we see in Ukraine, Aaron, relate to our previous question. So what we've seen over the course of the last 2 years is a reconstitution of the Russian military with a rapidity and a determination that, frankly, surprises us. The level of Russian militarization, its ability to rebuild its tanks, its missiles, its UAVs, with the assistance of China, support from North Korea, also from Iran. That has been a topic of real anxiety, and we've briefed our European counterparts on our concerns, which they share. So ultimately, what we have is a really quite profound partnership between China and Russia. And I will say, Aaron, we talked about this once. You won't remember, I don't think, but I mentioned to you that there's no bilateral relationship that we've gotten more wrong historically. We missed the Sino-Soviet split for a long time. We're unable to understand and read the signs of alienation. Over the last 10 years, we've frankly missed that the incredible opening that Kissinger had made, ushering China more into the global West, that the major project that President Xi is involved in is a profound deepening of relations between China and Russia, much more so than is widely understood. It's probably the most formidable and important bilateral engagement globally today that we have to take note of and respond to. But China's determination to support Russia, and remember, when they made those decisions, Russia was very much on its back foot, and there were worries about Putin's very survival. Now we're in a situation where Russia is seeking to change the territorial lines of Europe, and the fact that China is backing this so substantially is a topic of real concern. I will say that we are proud of the work that we've done together with Ukraine. They have, if you look at where we are today after a few years of conflict, no one would have imagined the remarkable ensemble of nations, not just in Europe. If you ask Aaron, who are some of the biggest providers of equipment, both civil and military, to Ukraine, it's not simply Europe, it's Japan, it's South Korea. The linkage of the theaters and the recognition that the challenges here have consequences not just for Europe, but for the Indo-Pacific are absolutely clear. I will say it does suggest that the stakes for us are high, that we cannot afford to accept outcomes that are suboptimal to the extent that either Russia or China would come away from this thinking that this kind of experience should be replicated elsewhere.
Right. I mean, I have to say, Kurt, in closing, that it does the administration's efforts on Ukraine were really quite remarkable. I was told in the wake of Vietnam, America would lead again. Then, in the wake of Iraq and Afghanistan, America would never lead again. Then, in the wake of the Afghan withdrawal, America would never lead again. And I think it is testament to the fact that we do have this potential.
Aaron, can I give you an anecdote on that? Just
yes,
very quickly. I know we've got to conclude here. So I was involved in a complex negotiation with our Indo-Pacific partners around how to think about next steps on critical minerals and supply chains. And at the very last, we were in San Francisco. Some of the elements that I think countries in the Indo-Pacific hoped for, we were just not able to go through on. It's just right now, for a variety of domestic and other considerations, it was hard to see. I would say in that meeting, when these countries were informed, they were frankly quite disappointed. These are some of our leading countries in the region: Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. I watched then every country go out on stage and do everything possible to bolster the concept of American leadership and thank the United States for the steps that it had taken. And I really learned something rather profound at that moment, that, despite the frustrations and difficulties associated with American leadership, almost every country that we partner with wants to see more of it, not less of it. I will also say that one of the most interesting features of the debate and discussion about the United States, which you rightly focus on, Aaron, is the idea somehow of American decline, that we've reached a moment that we can no longer go on. And I would look back, happened during the Korean War when our forces were overrun, at the end of Vietnam, at the end of the financial crisis in the 1990s, more recently in the financial crisis in the 2000s. Each time there was a view among some countries that the United States was down and out. We could not muster the capacity to lead. And then somehow, through our ability to reinvent ourselves, to repurpose, to work harder, we've always had the ability to go forward. And I believe in some respects, we've been able to do that with technology and the like. If you look just 3 years ago, Aaron, it's now quickly forgotten. It was just accepted that the U.S. economy was going down, the Chinese economy was going up, that we were in a terrible post-COVID set of circumstances. We are again in a situation where our economy is the envy of the world. We're leading global coalitions that are unprecedented. There are real concerns about China's growth and economy. Frankly, if we're able to continue along this path, I'm confident that the United States, with its partners, will at least give the challenges that you articulated at the outset a running chance, right?
I agree. And I'll close by saying, pardon the editorial comment, having voted for Republicans and Democrats and worked for Republicans and Democrats, I think on the issue of U.S. leadership, November 5 poses a extremely important and critical choice for Americans in this regard. Kurt Campbell, Deputy Secretary Kurt Campbell, thank you so much for coming on again. I look forward to you'll come back, and we'll see one another at our favorite watering hole.
And when I see you, I'm looking for more wisdom about next steps.
Likewise, Kurt. Likewise.
Thank you.
Take care. Be well.